Okay, so for this video, we are going to look at Roman names. So, the Romans had a system called the Tria Nomina. So, nomina as in name, so nomen. And it's plural in this case, so it's neuter. And three. So they had a three-name system that they used in ancient Rome. And so let's take a look at some of these names that I have as examples. And let's go to Marcus Antonius. Let's start there. So we have Marcus, and then we have Antonius. So, and this one looks pretty similar to our names. So if you think about it, try to think of our names. So we all have at least two names. What would you call your first name? What would that be to you? That would be your personal name. So you alone have that name, and that gives you your sort of identity. And the Romans called their personal name the praenomen. So the praenomen was their first name. So pra as in before, the nomen. And because their nomen was the second name that they had. So this Antonius would be his nomen. So if the praenomen was his personal name, so Marcus, that's who he is. Antonius, what would be that? What do you think that would be? And think about our names today. It's really similar. What is our second name? Does anyone else have it? Who has it if they do? It's going to be your family name. So, Marcus Antonius, his personal name Marcus, and then his family name or his nomen is Antonius. And so family was a really big deal in ancient Rome. So that was their main name. This was before their name, and their family name was their actual name. Now, before we get too far in this, you do have to know, it's important to know that families, when you refer to a whole family as a whole, it's feminine. So we see the IUS or like the US and we think, what gender? Masculine. And so to make that feminine, if we want to refer to the whole Antonius family together, we would call them Antonia family. Familia. Because notice, familia is feminine. And when adjective or when nouns agree, when adjectives agree, they agree in case, number, and gender. So Antonia and familia have to agree as case, number, and gender, making Antonia feminine. And then it turns into masculine when you're talking about a man or a male in the family. So that's why Marcus Antonius is masculine in this case. So we know that this praenomen, that's his personal name. And then we have the nomen, which is the family name. So let's go down below and look. So we have Gallio. Now, Gallio. There's only one name. Which part, thinking back up here, we have the praenomen and the nomen. Which one do you think is Gallio? That is going to be, the praenomen. Now, look, what name does he not have? What does the nomen stand for? The family. So, Gallio does not have a family name. So what do you think he was in Rome? Who did not have families? Because legally they were property. Slaves. So slaves did not typically have family names when you refer to them. On legal documents, they might have their family name might be the family who owns them. So if Gallia was owned by the Antonia family, Antonius of Antonius, so let's think Antonii. So of the Anton or the I. So let me correct that. So of the Antonia family, so Antonii. So Gallia of the Antonia family. But usually they did not have a family name because they were slaves. They did not have a family. Moving up on this list, Gaius is what? What type of name is it? It's the pronomen, so that is his personal name. Julius, remember this is actually a J. J's turned into I's in Latin. So Julius was what type of name? The nomen. And that was the family, so the Julia family that he was in. And then we get another name. And this is where the trionomia comes into play. So 3 names. Caesar has a cognomen. And this was to differentiate between people in the same family. Because for boys, so if you were a first son in a family, you had the same exact name as your father. Same exact name as your father. So Gaius Julius Caesar, his father would have been what? Gaius Julius Caesar. So they had the exact same name, and that's why they added a third part, because sometimes Gaius Julius. So there was somewhere in Caesar's long line of ancestors, he had an ancestor named Gaius Julius. And then that man had a son, and his name was Gaius Julius. And so on until someone was like, okay, we need to tell these people apart. So what they did is they gave the name Caesar. Now, this is basically a nickname. So we have the first part, which is the pronomen, which is your personal name. The second part is your nomen. So before the name, and the name is the family name. And if you had a third part to your name, this was the cognomen, and this was a nickname. Now, Romans back then were not as clever. Well, they thought they were really clever, but they were not as creative, as I would say. They based these nicknames on physical features that you had. So if you had white hair, you might be called Whitey or White. If you were a drunkard, or if you had buck teeth, or if you were short or fat or tall or skinny or hairy or had some colored hair like blonde hair or black hair, or they thought you were wise, or they thought you were beautiful or charming, they would nickname you based on that feature. So however you looked, however you acted, they were descriptive, and that's how they gave you your nickname. And they thought that was a great way to name people. So one of the historical things is that Caesar actually means Harry. Back when one of Caesar's ancestors got this name, Caesar meant Harry. So one of his ancestors was Harry, and the Romans thought, you know what, we need to distinguish these Gaius Juliuses. Let's name that one Caesar. And so, because he was Harry, and well, supposedly Harry, and so that kept on. And again, since first sons have the exact same name as their fathers, then Caesar was passed down, and so you have many Gaius Julius Caesars in the family. So now we have our praenomen, nomen, and agnomen. So the three parts to our tria nomina. If you look above, you'll notice, well, above Caesar, you'll notice Lucius Cornelius Sulla Felix. So again, Lucius is what part of the name? That's our praenomen. So that's his personal name. Cornelius, that's going to be our nomen. So his family name, he's come from the Cornelia family. And then we have Sulla, and let's see. There's not a distinct meaning to this name. So I'm not actually quite sure why someone would be named Sulla, but for some reason, they decided to give that name to this family, and it's been passed down because first sons have the same exact name. And then we get a fourth name with Sulla here. And as a side note, you would not, if you were walking up and I saw Caesar on the street, I wouldn't call him Gaius. Gaius is his personal name. That's only for people who are really close to him. I would either call him Julius, I would probably call him Julius Caesar, or just Caesar. Those are more of a name that you would call someone that you're acquaintance with and you don't really know. So that's why, again, nowadays we call people by their last names, Mr. Smith, Mr. Johnson. And same thing back in Rome, they didn't say their first names, like Lucius. That was only for people who were close to them. So Sulla here has four names. Felix. And Felix is a title that the Senate gave to Sulla. Sulla was a general in the war, and he won many battles in Africa, and in Italy, and so the Senate decided to bestow upon him a title, just like in England when they gave out titles like Duke, Count. This wasn't really like that, but it was sort of like a title like the Brave or the Proud, and Felix means lucky. Now, he's a general and he's being called lucky. Think for a moment and think about that. Do you think that was a good thing to be called lucky if you were a general? Did you want to be lucky? You did. So, as a general, you actually did want to be lucky. You want to not only have battle strategies that you came up with and be successful with those, but you also wanted luck, because luck meant that the gods were on your side. So the gods were on your side if you were lucky. Fortune favored you. So that's why luck, the title Felix given to him, was such a great honor for him, to be called lucky. And these, and this fourth name is called the agnomen. So after the nomen is where we get that. So after the name, so if we want to agnomen, and these were titles So if you conquered a new place, and the Senate could bestow you a title, and they would do that based on where you just conquered. And so agnomen, praenomen, so before, nomen, the name, cognomen with the name, and agnomen after the name. And up top, the last one we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh my goodness, 8 names to this guy. So, Imperator Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus Divi Filius Augustus. So he didn't actually have all those names all at once. He usually didn't see on a piece of paper that whole thing. He would probably choose, depending on the time he was living, he would choose which name he was going to use on which papers. And when people referred to him, there were certain occasions when he would be called Imperator, or they would call him Divi Filius or Augustus. So these weren't used all at the same time, but it's good to see them all together. And so if we want to go through this again, Gaius is our praenomen, so his personal name. And then we have Julius, so that is the family that he's with. Caesar, because he is the adopted son of Caesar, since he's a type of son he has to, and the first son, technically not the first son, but Caesar did not recognize his first son, who he had with Cleopatra. And according to Caesar, he considered Octavius after Caesar was dead, he considered Octavius his first true son, so he has the exact same name, so Gaius Julius Caesar. And so Octavian was given the name after Caesar died. He got a Gaius Julius Caesar after Caesar died. And Octavian, he's a son, so he took that name, but he didn't want to forget his roots. He wanted to remember who he was before he became the adopted son of Julius Caesar. So he makes his own name that he previously had an adjective, Octavianus. ANUS is a sign of an adjective. We have Rome, and then we have Romanus. So adding ANUS, made it an adjective. So he's still Octavius. He's going back to his roots with this. And then Divi Filius. So we know Filius, because we have that word, is son. And then Divi comes from Deus, Dei. And that means, what? God. So, Divi Filius, son of God, Augustus. And Augustus is let me tell you how he got some of these names. So, let's see. This is what he got from Caesar when Caesar died. He inherited that as a first son. He then added Octavianus as a adjective, like I said, because he wanted to remember his roots after he was adopted. And so he's adding that to his name. And then later on, after Caesar's dead, he wants to honor Caesar. They deified Caesar. And so when they deified him, Octavian, or Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, said, you know what, since Caesar is a god and I am his son, obviously I am son of God. So he gave himself Divi Filius. He gave himself that title. And then he went on and he went on a bunch of military campaigns, fighting against the conspirators, and then reconquering other lands that had risen up after Caesar had died. And so he called himself Imperator. And Gaius Julius Caesar had originally, the man who assassinated Gaius Julius Caesar had initially, before, Octavian and stuff, he had called himself Imperator. And this is a commander of sorts. Like the supreme commander of the troops. So Julius Caesar called himself Imperator, and he put it after his name. Well, Octavian, he's going to put it before his name, sort of as a homage to Caesar, also saying, I'm also supreme commander, I'm reconquering all these lands, because in Rome, military was such cherished, so much, revered. And then later on, we have the Senate. So the Senate is the one who gave Octavian this name Augustus, and that's what he's going to use from about, let's say, I believe it was 29 BCE to until his death in 14 AD. So he's only really known as Augustus in the second part of his life. And when I go over Augustus and Octavian, I'll show you and I'll tell you that there really are two, there's two versions of this man. There's Octavian, he's Octavian for most of his life, and then he seems to turn into a different person halfway into his life named Augustus. And so we'll talk about Augustus. And Augustus is like the emperor version of himself. Octavian is more of the leader and growing up. But here we are. And so we have 4 different types of names. So we have the praenomen, the personal name, the nomen, the family name, the cognomen, the nickname, and the agnomen, which are titles that the Senate gives. So the Senate is the one who can give those. And so let's go down here to the bottom half of this, and let's see how people in their families actually actively did this. So we know each part of the name. We know first sons, the same exact name as their father. So if we have Gaius Julius Caesar, this is the Julia family tree, at least part of it. The Julia family was extensive. So Julius Caesar, who lived until 44 BCE. And he was the first son from his father. So if he was the first son, then what was his father's name? Gaius Julius Caesar. So they had this nickname way back before Julius Caesar did. But it was passed down. And then second sons, if we ever had a second son, there's no second sons involved in this part of the Julius tree. But they had their unique praenomen, so their personal name. So Lucius or Tiberius, there are about 12 different boy names that were popular that you really just stuck to, like 12 names that boys were called. And then, of course, they had their family name. So, second sons, their unique praenomen, Tiberius, Lucius, or whatever, and then whatever family name they were a part of. Girls were a little different. So, girls did not have a praenomen, so they didn't have a personal name. Instead, they only went by their nomen, and their nomen is the family name. But remember, it has to be feminine. So, what you would do is you would take off the US, and you would just add A. So, with Gaius Julius Caesar's sister, he did have a sister, what would her name be? So we look for, this is the praenomen, this is the nomen, and the cognomen. So we're looking at the nomen right here. We take off the US and make it feminine and add an A. So Julia, or you would call her Julia nowadays when you use the J. So, going further with this, so Octavius, we know, was adopted by Gaius Julius Caesar. So he was the first son, so his name would be Gaius Julius Caesar. Here, let me mark some of these. So we have the father, we have the sister, we have Gaius Julius Caesar, we have the first son, and then Gaius usually is, oh gosh. Now, he was called that as he was adopted. So his adopted name. But remember, his actual name is Octavius. So his name is Octavius. What would be his father's name? Also Octavius. So this is Octavius' actual father. His birth father. And then Octavius had a sister. So remember, we have the family name. We take off the US and we just add an A. So Octavia would be his sister. Fix that. So that would be his sister. And Octavius, also known as Gaius Julius Caesar or Imperator Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus Dewey Filius Augustus, that's not even his whole name. He still has a couple more names that I left out because not enough room on the paper. But he had only one daughter. He didn't have any other children except one daughter. So looking at his adopted name, because he uses his adopted name to name her, because he had her after he was adopted. What would be her name? So, for women, for girls, you go to the nomen, so the family name, and make it feminine. So his family name is Julius, Julie, and then you have to make it feminine. So Julia or Julia. And this was his daughter. Now, you'll notice that there's two Julias in this family. There's actually more Julias because there are not only two girls in this family from the Julia family. Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus had a granddaughter, and her name was Julia, or Julia. And so if you had more than one, so if you had more than one daughter, you numbered them. So you numbered them. So if there were two, if you had two daughters, you would have either major or minor. So major was the elder, minor was the younger. So we only have two Julias, so we would have Julia major and Julia minor. So she is older, so she's called major. She's younger, so she's called minor. If you have more than two, this is when you get numbers. So prima, secunda, and so on. So you just start number the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many daughters you had. So if you had 6 daughters, you would number them 1 through 6. And that's how you knew who you were talking about if you were talking about any of your daughters. And so, real quick, up here, So we went through, these new names. So if you had one name, you only had the pronomen, or maybe you had two names, you had the pronomen and the nomen. And then when you climbed, notice that the number of names you had. So the more names you had, actually the more power you had in Rome. Because down here, we have a slave, and he only has one name. But if we look up here, he eventually comes, I put emperor in quotations because he's not a true emperor, but he is basically an emperor. So, and he has the most names. So really the number of names you had equaled the number of auctoritas or authority that you had in Rome. So that's a little bit how their name, the Tria Nomina system of naming worked in Rome. And it's called Tria Nomina, so we have 4, but because most people only had 3. Not a lot of people had more than 4. So mostly 3. So common people, commoners, had 2. Slaves had 1, commoners had 2. And then this is when you get patricians. So patricians definitely had 3. And then when you had 4, you were probably a general or had great deeds. You're in for your service to Rome. And that's why you got a 4th name. And then Octavius, he is the outlier. No other people have had that many names. But he became technically an emperor. Well, not really technically an emperor, but that's why he has many names. And over here we have some names, or so the cognomen. So these are the nicknames. And these are the meanings for those. So, albinus, pale or white. So if someone was pale or white or had white hair, they were probably called albinus as a nickname. Plump, drunkard, toothy, raucous. We have fool or dolt, large forehead, Caesar. So originally meant hairy, and a being called emperor or imperial leader. So hail Caesar meant you're hailing an emperor or a great leader. We also get the word Tsar eventually from Caesar, meaning the king or emperor. Dives, wealthy. Pulcher, beautiful. Seneca means elderly. And so these ones are titles. So if you manage to conquer parts of Africa, you can be called Africanus. So Scipio, Africanus. Because he conquered part of some of the people of Africa. Britannicus. There was a man named Britannicus because his father conquered Britain. So I believe it was, Claudius, the Emperor Claudius. He managed to finally claim part of Britain, and he was awarded the name Britannicus, and he passed it down to his son, because again, first sons get exactly the same name as their father. So his son's name was Britannicus. There was also a man in the imperial family called Germanicus, because he went and conquered parts of Germany, also parts of France. That area was called Gaul, but he managed to conquer parts of Germany. Asiaticus, conqueror of Asia. And then we have Lepidus, who is charming, and Claudius, who is crippled. So keep in mind Claudius when we go over and talk about the emperors later on. So his name really means crippled, and you'll see why, because people thought he was crippled. So there are reasons why people are called these names. And so that is it. Now, if you have any questions about this, don't hesitate to ask. This will be on your test that you guys will have eventually. So make sure that you know how this all works. Make sure you know the four different parts to a name. Also the fact that the more names you had, the more authority you had. And also, how girls were named, how boys were named. And yes, so that is all.